there is a kind of almost ideological divide between whether agencies should pitch for work or not, and I'll try and avoid that ideology. The key question is, when a client says we're looking for somebody to fulfill this role for us, to deliver this work, and we'll be talking about digital work, apps and websites, particularly we'll be looking at a spreadsheet that deals with website development, but this also applies across a whole range of activities. When a client says we're looking for somebody to do this work, it's kind of common sense to say, well, I want the people who are going to be doing the work to show us what they're going to do before we agree to pay them. And that's where the idea of the pitch comes in, that folks come in and do a bit of a kind of song and dance routine saying, this is the glorious vision of the future that I'm going to show you. This is what we're going to be doing for you. Give us the money. And to see how this works out in practice, because we want to keep this very practical, we'll go back to the planning spreadsheet that we used for one of these webinars a couple of weeks ago. And we'll look at how the question of whether we pitch or not impacts the financials on different project sizes. And then after we've looked at that, we'll also look at some of the indirect costs. So we'll use the spreadsheet to define the direct costs, what actually happens to the cost of the project as a result of having to pitch. And then we'll look at the indirect costs of what it does to the organization, whether it impacts the way in which people invest, and therefore what likely return you get on that investment. So let's jump across to sharing screen, and let me bring up our spreadsheet. So here we go. And we've seen this before. Let's just throw in some numbers for an arbitrary project. Don't get too hung up on the numbers, exactly how we're structuring the project. These will be wrong. Any project that we're doing, we're always going to say, how do we need to structure the team in order to deliver value for the client within their budget? In this case, we're just making it up for demonstration purposes. So don't worry if maybe you think, oh, I wouldn't have done it that way. Great, glad you wouldn't have done it that way. That's good. So let's have an entirely arbitrary project. Let's assume that we're going to start with user experience design. What's the presentation information, flow of user journeys through the project, etc. We're going to get a UX guy on this for 3 months, right? Let's say 60 days. We're going to get a digital designer who needs to overlap with the UX person and then deliver assets for the developers. Let's say another 3 months. We want a creative director involved in this, right? We want her or his insight for 10 days during the project. Content, we're definitely going to want a copywriter, verbal branding person. We might also want a few other bits and pieces. Maybe we need some photography, but let's not go overboard on that. Let's not assume we're doing a huge animation project, but we'll say 30 days. Development, front-end programmer, back-end programmer, 2 months each, plus a little bit of time for amends after that, so 100 days. Site admin, we want a CMS admin to work on this for a month towards the end to get everything built out. And there's going to be a little bit of project admin, which might be things like checklists, repos, etc. Okay. QA is automatically calculated. Project management is automatically calculated in this spreadsheet. So they're set as a percentage. We can see over on the right here, we've got QA is set as 40% of development, project management 25% of the total. And let's also assume, because this is a decent sized project, and we really care about the quality and whether it's going to resonate with the audience, we want user testing here. So we'll just put in a budget for user testing. So there's our user testing budget. Now that assumes we all know what we're doing and we can just get going. Realistically, we want to make sure that we're completely clear what we need to do that's going to deliver the value for the client. So before we get anywhere near this, let's say we're going to spend 5 days gathering the requirements from the client and what they practically need to do. And we also need to build up some emotional comfort with them. Nobody ever says, oh, I'm going to give you $500,000, which is what this is turning into, on a purely rational decision based on a few conversations. They want to feel good. We're going to have to wheel a couple of people into a conference room to do a presentation and smile and build a bit of confidence. There'll be documents that they need, etc. Call that 5 days. Stakeholder management sounds like, oh, their stakeholders are going to be a problem and we need to manage them. Well, it's $500,000, damn right they're going to be a problem because they're going to care and they're going to want to make sure that we're genuinely serving their needs. More importantly, we want to make sure we're engaging with them to really understand what they need, and then what we deliver is going to be as usable as possible for all parts of the business. So that's a fairly major piece of work. We want to properly engage with them. Okay, so we have now hit $500,000. That's a reasonable sized website. Yes, really big companies will spend tens of millions perhaps, but most people will look at that and go, ah, that's quite big. I didn't think websites would cost that much. So let's look at a smaller one, right? So what I'm going to do here is I will rename this to medium stroke large, right? And I'm going to create a duplicate of that, which I'm going to call, what am I going to call it? Let's just call it medium small, right? And here, let's slash this down. Our creative director becomes a consultant. He's just going to spend 1 day in just to really work with the digital designer and lift the quality of the site. 15 days, 3 weeks for the design. It's not excessive. UX, again, becomes a consultant. We're not having a full UX pass. We're not doing user testing because we're trying to control the budget down. Content, let's ask the client to write the copy. Let's use their photography out of their photography bank or stock photography, but we do need a bit of editing on the text. Development, let's say we're going to do it in a month. Maybe that's 3 weeks of a full stack developer and then 5 days of a front end guy who can come in and really add a few little pieces of polish. And site admin, we're going to get it way down. Let's assume this is a much smaller site. We can do this in a couple of days. Project admin, a couple of days, right? Site admin's a bit low, isn't it? Okay, 5 days. Okay, so this is a significantly smaller site. Again, some people might look at this and go, actually, that's still looking a bit big for me. We did a webinar a few weeks ago going, how do we do a website for $10,000? Short answer is we don't, but how would somebody do it for $10,000? So obviously there are clients asking for rather smaller budgets than this. This is still coming in at $100,000. So let's do this again. And let's say duplicate, and let's call this one smallish. And we're not going to try and get down to the $10,000 mark, but let's cut this down. No creative director. Tell the digital designer to work significantly faster. Probably create fewer individual unique elements of the site, so it doesn't need quite as much coding time. Content, minimum amount of effort. Let's definitely just use the client's content and do the absolute minimum there. Site admin, yeah, let's bring that down even further. Just build it in as quickly as possible and not agonize or iterate so much. UX, do we even need the UX person as a consultant? No, probably not. Because we're trying to keep the costs down here. Let's say we're not going to spend nearly as long collecting requirements. We're just going to do enough to make them feel emotionally comfortable, but not really sort of build that up. And the stakeholder management becomes, what do we need to do rather than let's really commit to this. Okay, so this is a significantly smaller number than this. Actually, maybe this, if we're spending that amount, I don't really want to drop down stakeholder management. I mean, we did a small project a while ago with an e-commerce solution where we spent longer dealing with customer service and finance than we did building the solution. So let's not pull that down too far, but maybe they get a bit less emotional comfort and we're not going to spend quite as much time in requirements gathering because it won't be quite as complicated. So this gives us 3 different project sizes. Now let's look at what happens when we pitch. And let's start right at the bottom. So let's start with our smallest one. So we're going to say that before we get this work, the client is going to expect us to put in an amount of effort which is speculative. So this requirements gathering, we're going to have those conversations where we try and understand their needs before they've said yes, and we start building up our understanding, but at the same time building up their confidence. The emotional comfort, exactly the same thing. And then before they give us the work, they're going to say, now show us what you're going to do, which means we need to put some time into the design, possibly into the content. I mean, at least we need to write some, slogans and headlines and some initial pieces of content that will appear in this presentation that we're doing. You can see what's happening here as I'm putting a yes in pitch, yes, no. It's giving an adjusted value in this column to the right. And that is dependent upon 2 things. So that's the percentage of pitches which we're expecting to then turn into real work. So this is assuming 1 in 4 of these early conversations turns into real work. And also, how much effort do we need to put in order to get a compelling looking pitch for the client? So if we're saying project pitch percentage, and we're saying 0.4, 40%. So we're saying 40% of the design work is going to have to be done before we've completed the pitch, before they decide as a client they're going to give us the money. And that sounds maybe a bit high, but of course we have to work this up into a presentation. So let's keep that as 40%. We're also saying business cost pitch proportion 50%. We're saying that this requirements gathering and emotional comfort kind of becomes part of the pitch process, because we're doing that to build confidence and ensure that what we present in the pitch is appropriate. So some of that has to be done as well. So we're saying half of each of these numbers, and we're saying we've only got a 1 in 4 chance of success. And you can see what's happened down here is this percentage is being calculated as the difference between that rising to that. So we have added 40% to our project budget because we have to pitch. So if the client had said, tell us factually what you're going to do, send us your credentials document, let's have a conversation about how we're going to work together, give us the names and phone numbers of half a dozen people you've worked with before so we can check up on them. They can do a load of due diligence, we can do a load of thinking, but we're not doing a pitch. At that point, in this case, 51,000. But actually, by the time we then have to go through this process of doing a pitch, and we have to allow for that as a cost that is only going to be recouped one time in 4, we've now gone up to 70,000. So that's a 40% increase. Right. And we can look at what happens on other size projects. So here's a different project. Let's say we're going in yes to that, yes to that. Some of that's going to have to go in. Let's get our creative director involved as well. And likewise down here. Right. That's kind of looking similar, but maybe we've overdone it a bit here because we've now got more time in, for example, design and content. So what we can probably do here is say, actually, we don't have to do 40% of the creative work just to pitch. We can probably get away with 20% of the creative work. Because if we're doing a pitch, maybe we show 2 or 3 screens on a mood board with some other materials which have been drawn from public domain sources, and we can have some nice pasteboards that we put up in the room and we point to them. Maybe we turn these into a really simple kind of animated video or have really simple clickable prototypes. You can start feeling that it's real, but a clickable prototype, if it's that simple, is super quick to put together. This 20% is probably reasonable. Okay. Or we can go for our larger project, our $500,000 project. And at this point, we can say, well, okay, we're going to want a bunch of people in the room, creative director, designer, when we're doing the pitch, right? UX, and a content person. And a lot of big agencies will talk about a pitch day, right? We've got a pitch, we're going to get some medium to senior people in a room for one day, and we're going to work out what we're going to do. And then we're going to build up some assets and a presentation based on that. And that's how the pitch comes into being very often. This does not need to be 40% of the creative work. Right? Our designer is going to be working on this for 3 months. We're not doing a month of that just for the pitch. It's much more like a day. So let's go for something like that. The interesting thing here is we might say, actually, we can really push this. We can, oh yeah, and I need to come down here as well. We might really push this and say, well, let's do some more work. This user testing budget, let's actually get users, the target audience, involved as we're doing our pitch process. And we'll interview them, and we'll video ourselves interviewing them, and we'll bounce some of our initial ideas off them to sense check it, to make sure that what we're doing for the client is really appropriate for the project, for the deliverables, right? So here we've now got a whole bunch of people involved, not just in a pitch day, not just putting together a presentation, but more deeply engaged, maybe talking to users. We've got a whole load more time that's going in down at the bottom. And we're pushing our project cost up from 500,000 to 552,600, right? Let's just check this. Yeah. So that's our different options. So what's happening as we're getting into this pitch process is the bigger the project is, actually on this, the more effort we're putting in. It's only on the large project that we're taking a little bit of our user testing budget and actually talking to, for example, consumers. So this gives us 3 models that we can look at. So if we now think about this in terms of what the real cost is, we can estimate what the initial practical concrete cost of a pitch is. Right? We can say on this smallish project, we've just increased the budget by 40%. Medium-sized project, it's 25%. On a large project, it's gone up 10%. So that's the first question. Right? How much does a free pitch cost? That's it. Answer, question solved. We can all leave. Except there's a kind of second level to this as well, which I'll get into. So before I look at the sort of second step of what's the costs here, let's just summarize this and also revisit what a pitch is. So in summary, we're saying based on project size, we're adding between, say, 10% and 40% roughly to the cost of a project as a result of someone pitching. Now, a pitch has been described as, and this is actually fair, an arbitrary answer to an artificial question. One of the hardest things to do with clients when they give you their brief and they tell you about this wonderful thing they want you to create and how important it's going to be from them, one of the hardest things to do is to point out to them that all briefs are wrong. All briefs are always wrong. They're incomplete. They overstate something. They miss a key piece of information, whatever the issue is. And it's only when you really engage with the company and get into it that you start working out where you can really deliver the value, what the real problem that they need solving is, and what the most effective solution is going to be. So it is always a bit of an artificial question that we're answering with the brief, right? Because we haven't had this, if we look at our large thing, we're expecting 20 days of interaction with stakeholders to really make sure we're integrating into what their needs are. Well, all we've done at the beginning is a pitch day. We haven't done any of that. So it remains an artificial question through the pitch process. And secondly, it has to be an arbitrary answer. It's inconceivable that we're going to spend 6-person months on UX and digital design and not come up with significantly better, more appropriate responses, which will be better informed because we started doing the stakeholder management in that 6-person months of work than we came up with in one day initially. Obviously, your ideas improve, you come up with better solutions, you come up with a clearer idea of what you need to deliver. So the answer is always an arbitrary answer. It's, well, this is what a bunch of experienced, intelligent people kind of thought when they put their heads together for a bit. So I guess the question is, what value is that to the organization? Or what are you missing out if you don't do it? Now, the first point that I think I'd make is that people assume that getting a pitch means you get better work. But when you look at these numbers, there's no reason to think that it does. Why do you think that having 3 groups of people, assuming you've got 3 groups of people pitching, why do you think that 3 groups of people coming up with an arbitrary answer in one day is going to come up with a better piece of work than choosing any one of those 3 perfectly competent professional groups and letting them loose at it for 6 months, 6-person months work? Right? Clearly, it's when they engage with the subject and do the real work that the real value is built in. And you can't tell who's going to do that from their arbitrary answer at the beginning. So why are you doing this? Well, the huge clear advantage, and this is kind of why I've left this on the large project spreadsheet, is it makes it massively easier to sign off the project. If you imagine a large organization that maybe doesn't like making decisions, has lots of processes, has lots of stakeholders that need to sign off, you get all those stakeholders together in a room for the pitches, you hand them a scorecard and tell them to tick the boxes of who they like. You almost don't care at that stage who they're going to pick. As long as they pick one of the 3 perfectly reasonable options that you've put in front of them. The fact is, at the end of that, they're all really psyched up. They've seen some beautiful visuals. They've seen some great, maybe video presentations or something clickable that looks real. And they've bought into it. you can get this project signed off. In a lot of large organizations, getting a pitch is part of the necessary process, which is required by the organization, either because somebody said, oh, it's best practices, that's how we do procurement, or because realistically, that's how you get stakeholders involved. And at that point, this 11% increase in the cost is like, it's a big company tax. You're basically paying a 10% tax because you're a large, averagely dysfunctional organization. That's a really good spend. Right? To say, well, we could have spent 495, 495, 100,000, but we would never have got it signed off. Or we spend another 10% more and it will actually go ahead and everyone's bought in and they can't so easily sabotage the project later because they've signed up to this. That's a really good spend from an organizational point of view moving forward. What's not so clear as we start going down into our smaller projects is that you're actually getting an organizational benefit from this. Okay, so as a commissioning client, what are you getting here? What are you getting for this 40%? If you're looking at a $50,000, say, website build, then you're probably a small enough information that you don't, small enough organization, sorry, that you don't have to have a dozen people in the room with huge numbers of hideous political competing agendas. You should be able to get this signed off by 3 or 4 professional people having a couple of sensible meetings and just agreeing something. Do they really need the song and dance routine? So yes, it makes it easier to sign the project off. That still counts. People love being shown, here is the great dream of the future, it's going to be wonderful. Right? And that will make it easy for them to say yes. But is it really worth adding 40% to your project budget just to make it easy to get people to sign it off? So suddenly the size of the project determines the organizational value. Right? For a big organization, it's proportionately less of the project fee, and it has more value. For these smaller ones, suddenly the pitch is looking really expensive for something that really isn't any more than just laziness. If we gritted our teeth and had some harder conversations, would we be able to move forward at 2/3 of the price? Probably. So the question then is, to pitch or not to pitch? As a client, do you ask for a pitch? And as an agency, should you? So let's go through a couple of the other implications before we look at this. Let's look at this pitch ratio at the top. Let's see what happens as we change that pitch ratio. If it's a large project, and let's say that our big agency or medium to big agency is going to say, do you know what, we're fantastic at pitching. We're going to win 2 of these. Sorry, 1 in 2. Yeah, 50% chance. This is fantastic because it's actually a much smaller percentage of the total cost that has to be attributed to pitching. Or it might be that we're not so good at pitching and we're being a bit speculative and we're moving into a new industry and we're trying to establish ourselves and we'll only get 1 in 7. Okay, that's just gone up. That's gone up quite a lot. But if we're around this 2 to 4, we're only talking about $20,000. Now, only $20,000, okay, personally, give me $20,000, I will care. But from a large company point of view, it's only $20,000 that it's going to make as a difference, right? Between, between that and that and that, right? So the pitch ratio percentage doesn't make that much difference. As a large agency, we grow by winning more work, right? We only have a certain number of opportunities. The more of those we win, the more our agency grows. If we screw up, our agency shrinks. So our business size is dependent upon this, but our profitability isn't really. As an agency, we're probably making a 15 to 20% margin. So we're going to make 20% on $500,000. That's fine. That works. What we want to do with that $500,000 is not have that project go wrong, make sure that it delivers great results and that the client's really happy with it. It's the quality of our delivery, our management of risk, our ability to delight the client, our ability to deliver against the probably quite complex requirements that have been set. That's where we make money. Right? We don't actually make more money on a project by project basis by improving our win ratio. We care about our win ratio because that's how our business grows, but it's not a critical issue in terms of will my business go bust. Whereas if we go back to this small one, so if we're saying we're going to charge $70,000 for each project of this size, and we win every single pitch, and there are some agencies who do literally win every single pitch. The ones who are really, really good at it will have, a 90, 95%, 100% win rate. At that point, it is a win rate. This can only be thought of in sales terms. This is not a question of we come up with our best option and see if it fits for the client. This is we need to win this, right? And that massively impacts our profitability. Going from that to that, if we charge 70,000 anyway, we've gone from having a 20% margin to having a 40% margin, a 50% margin. We've become a massively profitable company by being really good at pitching. So what that actually means is our core competence has changed, has totally shifted. If we do these smaller projects, as Agency Mind, for example, does, and we do not pitch, our core competence has to be delivery. For the big guys, they have to be equally competent at delivery and winning pitches, assuming they're pitching, and most of the big guys will. Right? So for them, both big agency, core competence, and winning pitches. And if Agency Mind were working at this level and we were pitching for $500,000 projects, we would probably do that by setting up a separate pitching team from the core teams. So the core teams could focus on solving the problem, delighting the client, doing awesome work, getting fantastic results, without the very different mindset of the pitching team swaying them. Right? And of course, that's possible if you're a larger organization. If we were turning over 10 million a year and doing 20 of these projects a year, that would be entirely doable. As a smaller team, it's really hard to do that because you're now pulling the team mentally, culturally between what are we doing? Are we trying to win from a sales point of view, or are you trying to succeed from an operational and delivery point of view? So from a large company point of view, you can do both, right? You have your pitch team who are trying to win. You have your delivery, creative, technical guys who are trying to deliver something awesome. When we get into the smaller one, you choose one or the other. And if you pitch, you're pitching, and you go bust if you screw up. Right? So if we're charging 70,000, I think we said, for each of these projects, and we only win 1 in 10 pitches, we only had a 20% margin on that 70,000. Our company's going to go bankrupt. If we win every single one, I buy a new Porsche tomorrow. Right? It's that dramatic. So it completely changes the core competence of a small team when they pitch. The other thing that I would point out is if you're placing a larger project, you have a question of what your selection criteria are. Is your selection criteria really how impressive is the pitch? How much was I wowed? How beautiful was the vision of the future that somebody gave me? Is that what you're looking at? And to give you a concrete example, the last time I had a kind of business change partner selection project for a largish organization, we placed a project where 3 shortlisted agencies, and we did not get them to pitch. Right? If we had got them to pitch, we would have been in a situation where the 3 selected agencies, one was a fantastic cultural fit for us and had processes that immediately meshed with how we worked. They would instantly, from day one, have been incredibly easy to work with. Partner number 2 was technically ridiculously strong. They were phenomenally strong technically, and they could have delivered far more complex, efficient technical solutions than the first partner could. The third was set up for efficiency. Their delivery was incredibly efficient and very cost effective, but we would have had to have changed as a client our operational procedures in terms of how we dealt with an external. So in that case, do you want to be making the decision what really works for our organization? Do we want technical competence, efficiency of delivery, or ease of integration? Or do you want to be saying, who's going to be showing me the best vision of the future? So my contention would be that if you go for people to pitch, for a large organization, it doesn't cost you that much more but there is a danger that you will be making a decision based on how good people are at wowing you and foregoing the best option in terms of delivery. Logically, if you've got 3 people pitching, only 1 in 3 of those can be the best. And the odds that the person who's the best is also the best at pitching is probably only 1 in 3. So 2/3 of the time you will get a substandard selection of a partner through a pitch process. Now, you could say you don't care. You could also say you don't get the choice. In a lot of organizations, you have to have a pitch as part of the process. And you could say that actually somebody who's very good is perfectly reasonable as a substitute for somebody who's very, very good, so long as you can get the project signed off and everybody will work happily behind it. So in summary, do you pitch or not as an agency? What's your core competence? If you're a small agency, what is your core competence and what's your appetite for risk? Right? If you're really good at pitching and you're happy with a bit of risk, of course you'll pitch. Why the hell would you not? Right? If you're not particularly good at pitching and you don't want your team culture to be based around that, you want them to be focused on something else, or you don't like the risk. And for us, an agency might be a question of team culture and focus and how we orient the team on getting results. But any of those 3 reasons are reasons why you'll say, you know what, I'm just not pitching. I will turn the client away rather than pitch. As a client organization, do you ask for a pitch or not? To summarize, well, for a lot of large organizations, you have to. You don't even get the choice. The way in which your organization operates and what people's expectations are will require you to get a pitch. If you don't have to do that, you get the choice. The choice is, do I go for a higher chance of getting the very best option and maybe saving 10%, but I don't really care about 10%? Or do I go for an easy project kickoff and my stakeholders better aligned as we go into the project, but maybe the quality is only very good as opposed to very, very good? And if you're spending $500,000 with an established agency, it damn well will be very good. Better be very good quality, right? Hopefully the only people you've got in the room at that stage are going to hit that quality bar. So that's the kind of decision making that you've got. Client side, is it about organizational advantage or generating maximum value? And that'll probably partly depend on your organization, also on your size. For a small organization, it's really quite hard to justify the pitch, but you might still have to. For a large organization, it's easy to justify the pitch, and you might have to. And from an agency point of view, what's your core competence? Are you big enough that you can afford to have dual competencies, or do you need to get that focus? And what's your appetite to risk within the team?